Welcome to SB&M is Here, the State Bar of New Mexico's official podcast. In this series, we'll discuss topics such as professional development, tools of the legal trade, and mental and professional well-being. Connecting the legal community across New Mexico, SB&M is here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Season 3 of SB&M is Here. This is Morgan Pettit, Member Services Manager and Podcast Producer. We are adding another episode to our collection of Judges episodes. Today, we are honored to hear from Chief Judge Jennifer DeLaney from the Sixth Judicial District Court. Larry Heyeck, who is from the Third Judicial District Court, interviews Chief Judge on topics ranging from what it's like to be in a judicial position in a smaller community, some judicial pet peeves and some tips, and what court procedure is like in the Sixth and how it differs from the surrounding areas. We also get to learn a little bit about the Chief Judge herself and the community that is Deming. Apparently, I need to add the City of Rocks and duck racing on my New Mexico bucket list. So thanks for that, Chief Judge. Also, a big thank you to Larry for arranging this episode. I've been wanting to get more geographical representation on the airwaves. So if you are outside the Rio Grande corridor, I would love to have you, and pretty please reach out. Without further ado, Larry, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Morgan. We are here today with Judge Jennifer DeLaney. How are you, Judge?
Doing very well. Thank you, Larry.
Judge DeLaney was elected to her current position in November of 2012. Since Judge DeLaney took her oath as a district court judge, she has worked tirelessly to provide justice in the Sixth Judicial District. Her current caseload includes civil cases, family law and domestic relations, criminal cases, probate cases, appeals from the magistrate and municipal courts, and a variety of other general jurisdiction cases. Judge DeLaney has also presided over the adult drug court in Luna County since its creation in 2016. Judge DeLaney has served as the Chief Judge in the Sixth Judicial District since 2018 and maintains an active role in the Chief Judge's Council. In addition to her duties on the bench, Judge DeLaney is an active member of the local and statewide legal community. She is chair of the board for the Luna County Juvenile Justice Continuum of Services, who administers funding through partnerships with Luna County to fund activities for the prevention of juvenile delinquency. Judge DeLaney is the member of the Children's Court Judges Association and the Children's Court Improvement Commission. She also chairs the Family Representation Commission, which was an integral part of the creation and passage of House Bill 46 in 2022, creating the Office of Family Representation and Advocacy that will employ and contract with attorneys across the state to represent statutorily required parties in abuse and neglect cases. Before taking the bench as a district court judge, Judge DeLaney served as a special master for the Sixth Judicial District hearing domestic violence, domestic relations, and child abuse and neglect cases for 3.5 years. She began her legal practice in Deming as a partner with DeLaney and Hernandez, LLC in 2002, along with her sister. We are certainly pleased to have Judge DeLaney with us. Judge DeLaney is the Chief Judge in the Sixth Judicial District, covering Luna, Hidalgo, and Grant County. Again, thank you so much for participating in today's podcast, Judge. I've always appreciated being in front of you, being in Deming, and enjoying not only you, but the other judges in the Sixth Judicial District. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate that introduction. And we try really hard down here in the Sixth.
Judge, I've known you on the bench for many years and certainly appreciated when I was going out and doing the circuit out there. But let our audience know a little bit more about you, your personal life, such as what activities and hobbies you may have.
Sure. I mean, I think the pandemic has changed a little bit about what everybody does, but I am, this isn't a hobby, but I'm a mother of two. One of my kiddos somehow turns 30 this year, and he came into my home when he was 15. I have another child who turns 11 this year, who is autistic. And so I get to experience, along with my wonderful husband, the joys of both of my boys. We did a lot of community activities. We were involved in the church, with the schools and everything prior to the pandemic. And of course, all of those things are slowly coming back. But we've spent a lot of time in nature over the past 2 years. If you have not gone to City of Rocks, which is located between Silver and Deming, I urge all of you to come and play out on the rocks. It is one of my favorite things to do with the kids and the dog, and just spending time outside, remembering that there are really good things in life still.
Now, I need to know about the duck races for this year. Are they on?
They are on. That is my understanding. So please come race a duck.
For all those that have never participated in the Deming duck races, they are an annual event and it's very big in the city. How many people would you say attend the duck races?
There are thousands. It is the largest event that happens in Luna County on a yearly basis. And people come in droves from out of town to come to the duck races. And these are real ducks that you can race on a dry or a wet track. And it's a lot of fun and a good boost for the community.
Living outside the corridor, what's it like living and working in Deming in Luna County?
So I moved to Deming in 2002 to open a private practice with my sister, and I guaranteed her that I would be here for 1 year because I didn't know how I could see myself living in such a small community. And, you know, that was 20 years ago. And so clearly Deming is now my home. It is where I met and raised my family. It's where I will continue to live for a very long time. And in some ways, it's like living in a neighborhood. So if you drive to your local grocery store, if you go to your local church, if you deal with businesses in your neighborhood, that's like living in Deming. The difficulty about living in a small town and being a judge is that we have one Walmart, which is and no Target. I have to drive 60 miles to go to a Target. That's the only drawback. But so I can walk down any aisle and see somebody whom I previously represented, who I sent to Department of Corrections 3 years ago, who I granted them custody, or I took their children away. And so I have to be cautious out in public, but I don't really let that affect my life. I continue to be who I am and try to be as respectful as possible to anybody on the bench so that they understand where my rulings came from, and haven't ever had an issue, but it's something I have to be cognizant about. But I love living in a small area.
So you mentioned your sister, and she is also a practicing lawyer. Tell us a little bit, what is her name and what does she do?
Sure. Her name is Amy DeLaney Hernandez, and she currently is a children's court attorney working for CYFD. We were in private practice together for a little over 7 years before I came up to the court to be a hearing officer. And as part of small town practice, we pretty much took whatever walked through the door. We did a lot of family law, some property issues, other various civil issues. And she was the best partner that I could have chosen, first of all, as a starting off attorney, and just in general. She really helped to mentor me. And then eventually she really supported me coming up to the bench.
Well, I've gotten to know her, and one of my favorite Deming individuals was a gentleman by the name of Ed Hand. I'm sure you remember Ed, or he still appears before you. But he warned me, people going to Deming, how you know if they live in Deming or are familiar with Deming is there's a mountain range. Tell me the mountain range that is by you.
Okay, I'm going to tell you, there is also a street named the same thing here in Deming. And when I first moved to Deming, I was told I needed to turn on Florida Street to find the grocery store. Well, I'm a licensed attorney in Florida, and we all know Florida is a state. Well, Florida is spelled the exact same way, which is the mountains that we have here as well. And I can't tell you how long I drove around before I went back to my sister's. I didn't have a cell phone back then. Before I went back to my sister's and said, I cannot find Florida anywhere, which she still makes fun of me for this up to this day.
Well, Ed made fun of me when the first time I went out there, so he let me have it when I first said it wrong. During the pandemic, there's been an emphasis on wellness and making sure that you and your family are getting through it. How did you get through it? What things did you do to kind of protect yourself during this difficult times?
So I mean, really for everybody, the past couple of years have been very hard. My husband works at the local hospital here in Deming as an occupational therapist and rehab director. And so we had the added stress that all of those families where somebody works in the medical field had. And we had plans that if he were to get sick, we'd move him to a friend's house where nobody was living currently. And just the stress of what was happening to everybody. It was a lot. And in addition to the personal stress as chief judge, being the administrative authority to the district, I had concerns of my employees getting sick or potentially getting other employees sick, and just protecting everyone that worked for us. So the stress level was really, really high. And as I said before, that's when we started going outside as much as we possibly could to remember that there are beautiful, wonderful things outside. We also did a lot of Zoom family interactions because the judiciary could not travel outside of the state of New Mexico for a very long time period without having to telework for 2 weeks. And as chief, I thought it was very important for me to have a presence here at the court as much as possible, especially because my clerks couldn't on a regular basis get to go drive to Arizona and have 2 weeks of teleworking. We needed our staff to be here at the court. So I didn't get to see a lot of my family's in Texas, and I didn't get to see them for a really long time. And so we would do Zoom happy hours and Zoom get-togethers with families and family and friends that lived out of state. And we just worked really hard to stay as positive as possible. And luckily, I am married to an incredible partner, and my husband and I were able to balance one another out. So when he was stressed at work and at home, luckily those were times in which I was doing better, and we played off one another and supported one another to keep us functional. And I mean, the other thing is that, you know, I mentioned that my younger son is autistic, and he didn't go to a physical classroom forever and a day. And so trying to homeschool our child in addition to running the court and my husband having his job was an added stressor. And my TCAA helped my kiddo get on his Zooms every day because we're very much like a family here. And it was a difficult time. It is still, but much better now.
Well, Judge, you mentioned that you're the chief judge. Discuss your role as a chief judge and what does it encompass, such as what did you do during or for the 2022 legislative session?
So I'm going to tell you, before I became a judge, I really didn't understand what judges did with their time. It seemed like if they only had hearings 3 days a week, then really this must be some glamorous life where then you just get to golf the rest of the time. I was sadly mistaken. And my first year being a district court judge, I really learned how much work judges have. And now I'm in my 5th year of being chief. And it's kind of shocking me at the additional administrative responsibility that goes along with being the chief judge. So I am the head administrative authority for the Sixth Judicial District. Because of the consolidation of magistrate courts with the district courts, I now have 7 courts, 4 magistrate courts and 3 district courts. And that comes with 4 magistrate court judges and 4 district court judges. And then all of the employees for those 7 courts. And I am responsible for helping to deal with personnel issues. And a big part of what we deal with is the budget. So the courts, as everybody knows, have struggled for years and years having not only an adequate budget, but a budget to keep operations at the level that they should be. And so I staff with my CEO and now my CFO what our budgets are going to be that we present to the legislature on a yearly basis. And then we have to go through a process. We have an internal judiciary process where we present to the internal budget committee, and then that goes up to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to let us know what we as a district can ask for in the state's unified judicial budget. And then we have the opportunity to present to the interim legislative finance committee, as well as to Senate finance and House finance during the session to ask them to give us the money that we need to be funding. Judges are also encouraged to take up judicial issues and talk with legislators, about those as well. Obviously, one big issue this year was judicial salaries, which judges lobbied for. And then, as you mentioned in the intro, because I was working as chair of the Family Representation Commission, I did a lot of work with legislators to really get them to understand what an Office of Family Representation and Advocacy could do to families who are involved in the abuse and neglect system. And so there is a lot of additional responsibility that chiefs take on. You also, as a chief, under the rules, can take a reduced caseload. I chose not to do that because our caseloads are not so overwhelming at this time, but I don't travel. So I only get a case in Silver or in Lordsburg if I'm the fourth judge on the list, if they've gone through everybody else. Otherwise, my cases remain here in Deming, and that's helped. Although now that we're virtual, travel is not something that anyone's doing as often now.
Talk to me a little bit more about I want to get it right here, the Office of Family Representation and Advocacy. Tell me what benefits you see out of that.
Sure. So currently, there are statutorily provided attorneys for parents and children in abuse and neglect cases. And the Administrative Office of the Courts contracts with over 100 attorneys statewide to provide representation in those cases. Unfortunately, the AOC only has one attorney that manages those contracts. And I've been a part of several studies done over multiple years that show that managing the contracts through the Administrative Office of the Courts does not allow for us to provide the highest quality of representation possible. And there are studies that the ABA have put out, that the National Association of the Council of Children, that when you have high quality representation in these cases, that actually the cases move more quickly, whether that is getting them to reunification or getting them to termination. And so the goal for this office is to have a hybrid model of employed attorneys as well as contract attorneys. There will be eventually 5 physical offices located around the state where parents and children are represented in these cases, with the goal of reducing the trauma to these families and ensuring that they get the services so that when they come in front of a judge, if I am returning kids home, I know for sure they're going to be safe. Or if I'm terminating parental rights, I know that everything has been done that should have been done to get the parent to the finish line, but that it isn't going to happen.
It sounds like that's one of the achievements that you've been successful in doing. Tell us any other achievements that you want to highlight in Luna County or for the Sixth.
And I've been the chair of the Juvenile Justice Continuum Services Board since I came on the bench back in 2013. And we've been able to successfully get some grants from CYFD in addition to the JJCS money that we get from the legislature to run some juvenile programs here, like strengthening families and other juvenile programming to really help kids who come in contact with the juvenile justice system or to keep them out of coming in contact with the juvenile justice system. I've been involved with our local JDAI efforts here. I have done a lot of work during my time as judge here on the bench, but I think those are the ones that are coming to my foremost thought at this point in time.
Well, now, do you miss the practice?
I miss being an advocate. Which I think is one of the reasons that I like doing committee work so much, is because it gives me the opportunity to advocate not for individuals, but for systems change. And I think there's a lot of areas in which our systems could be improved. And so definitely every once in a while when I watch a closing argument, I think, oh, it would have been really nice to be able to do the opposing side of the closing argument, or maybe this is how I would have questioned the witness, which of course doesn't ultimately affect in any way the way in which I rule, but I enjoy advocacy. But I also enjoy walking back to my office after I've made a decision and not having to hear how all of the litigants are unhappy because I did what I thought was right. In private practice, you can get your client the world and beyond, and they're not happy. And it's not really because of what the ruling was, but it's because of what the situation was that led them to being where they are at. So I don't miss client contact in general.
Pros and cons of being a judge.
It's isolating. It is, luckily we have a great group of judges across the state. and a great group of chief judges. During the pandemic, even though we were very isolated, the chiefs started meeting almost every Friday via Google Meet to talk about the issues with the pandemic, how we could make things run better in our courthouses, what functional things we as a judiciary needed to do better, and just developed a great team of individuals trying to make sure justice was served in New Mexico. But in general, all of the attorneys who I practiced with previously, I don't get to go out to dinner with anymore because now they're appearing in front of me. And as I said, being in a small community, I do have to be very careful because this person that I sent to the Department of Corrections 2 years ago that got released yesterday might be here in Walmart walking next to me shopping. And so I just have to make sure that there aren't safety issues that I'm dealing with. So between safety and isolation, those are really the only cons, I believe, to being a judge. I like to provide justice. And I think that it's huge to be able to listen to each individual case and the individual facts, determine what law applies, and make a ruling based on that. And I enjoy doing that, which is, a good chunk of what the job is.
Well, I will tell you, I've been honored to appear before you, Judge Heyeck, Judge Foy, Judge Stewart. The group of judges that you have in the district courts out there is astounding. Certainly to your leadership as well as to the judges themselves. I think you do a wonderful job. Tell us about the different types of cases that come before you, because you're not just doing family law cases, you're also doing criminal, domestic violence. You're it. So why don't you tell our listeners about that?
Sure. So all four of us are all four of the district court judges here in the Sixth are general jurisdiction judges. We don't have judges that are simply assigned to the criminal docket, the civil docket, domestic relations. We do everything. And so Monday mornings are my assigned criminal docket day because the 2 contract public defenders we have out here in the Sixth, well, in Luna County, actually, then need to be with Judge Heyeck on Monday afternoons and magistrate court later in the week. And we have some time reserved for jury trials as well, but we have to all coordinate our schedules due to the limited number of attorneys that appear in front of us. And so I also run the adult drug court. So every other Monday afternoon, I've got adult drug court that I attend to. And then the rest of the week is kind of a roll of the dice. I may have civil and domestic relations and domestic violence cases all scheduled Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or a criminal jury trial. The majority of our civil jury trials have settled over the past however many years I've been on the bench, but I have had the occasion to try a civil jury trial or 2, which I enjoy. But it is, if you know anyone that's looking for a law clerk position, we have been hiring for a long time now. And unfortunately, people don't recognize how incredible it is to live in Deming or Silver City. And so the majority of the legal research and writing that I do is all my own, which I think is different from some of the courts that we have around the state. And so every new legal issue that comes in front of me, I have to make sure that I've taken the time and preparation to really understand what the issues are, what the case law is prior to walking in the courtroom.
COVID has changed a lot of things. Certainly, in my opinion, has made us more closer as a state. And I say that because the ability to get on Zoom, here we are in 2 different cities, but it really has brought us, in my way of thinking, closer as a profession and as a bar. But it's also made procedural changes, such as video hearings and you do Zoom or Google Meets. But tell us, what advice would you give practitioners as we try to wind down this pandemic as to how to appear in these types of environments?
I think the Supreme Court has made clear that video appearance is here to stay. We don't know what the new guidances will be going forward in the future. I'm hoping that each district court judge gets a little bit more leeway as to exactly what we are allowed to hear via video or what's required in person. But I agree, in some ways it has definitely made the state smaller. And I know that all of the attorneys appearing out of Albuquerque love the fact that they can appear via video instead of coming down to my beautiful Deming. I think one of the problems that we've seen during the pandemic is a When you walk into a courtroom, you feel that you're in a courtroom. You know that there is a certain decorum that is required of you when you go into that courtroom. And I think people forget when they're on video that they're still in my courtroom. And so I have to remind them that not only for attorneys do they need to continue to be in proper court attire, but they need to address the court properly. They need to not be on multiple hearings at one time. Just because you have the potential ability to do that does not mean that is what you should be doing. You are still sitting in my courtroom and need to behave like you're sitting in my courtroom. But for the most part, I think it's really opened up the access to justice. The Sixth was it didn't take us very long where we started doing video hearings. I think that telephone hearings are extremely difficult. People don't know when someone else is about to speak. There is a loss of etiquette. You get a lot from body language about what's going to happen next in a hearing. And so when people are appearing on the telephone, I think you lose a lot of that. I think that now, 2 years later, it's really incumbent upon attorneys to figure out how to use Zoom, how to use Google Meet, and to appear via video. I think that that's important. Will I rule against you if you're appearing via phone? Of course not. I'm going to listen to you in the exact same way that I would any other attorney or litigant appearing in front of me, but it really makes the proceeding go much more smoothly if everybody is on video. And as I said, video is here to stay, so everyone's got to get with it.
Well, as a practitioner who had appeared in front of you, I have this visual of you, Judge, and I'm seeing you because we are on video at this moment in time. But I remember appearing in front of you where you would lean in, lean down, tilt your head a little bit and say, "Nice try, Mr. Heyeck." I still have that visual. But what pet peeves would the practitioners have if they come before you? What are your pet peeves as a judge?
I don't think that I have a ton of them, but it does annoy me when parties don't speak to one another. I get it. If the person on the other side is pro se, sometimes they won't speak to an attorney until they're physically present or at least via video present in a courtroom because they're scared. But when you have two attorneys on a case, you need to speak to one another to see what you can resolve prior to coming to the hearing. I allow all parties some time at the beginning to discuss the case and see if they resolve it. But the reason that I've had to develop that practice is because attorneys weren't working together beforehand. And like if we have a scheduling conference, both attorneys know where they're at with regard to their cases, how much longer they need. I shouldn't have to recreate the wheel every time. They should talk about, okay, what are the deadlines we can agree to before we have to go back and forth in front of the judge and figure out things that we know we're on the same page with. So it's not that I think that it's a waste of the time of the court's time, because I don't really think there is a waste of the court's time. I'm elected as a civil servant to be here to do whatever is needed to do of me to move my cases along. But attorneys also have obligations to do what they need to do to move cases along too. And so not talking before hearing and not being prepared. I prepare for every hearing. I think that it is unfair to litigants to not be familiar with the file and know what the issues are. And I ask the same thing of attorneys. If you're being paid to represent someone, then you need to be familiar, if not more familiar with the case than I am as the judge. But other than that, I think attorneys for the most part try really hard and do a good job. Learning the rules of evidence better might be helpful as well. I believe that I'm decent at the rules of evidence, but I get frustrated, especially if there's a pro se party. Sometimes attorneys try to take advantage of the fact that a pro se party doesn't know what the rules of evidence are. So they will try to present evidence to the court that otherwise wouldn't come in. But it's my duty as a fact finder and administrator of justice to ensure that I'm not considering things that aren't allowed by the rules of evidence. So I just ask attorneys to edit what they're going to bring in. And if there was an attorney on the other side, would they ask those same questions? And if not, don't ask them when you have an unrepresented party.
Well, is there anything different you do for the pro se litigants that you wouldn't do for represented individuals? Do you handle them differently?
I try not to. If both parties are pro se, then really sometimes I don't have a choice. If I want to get the case resolved, I have to be very specific to them as to what information and or evidence I may need in order to resolve the case. I mean, I had a divorce proceeding the other day where both parties were pro se, and they each wanted to divide up the furnishings in the home, but neither one of them had a list. Neither one of them had a clue what the value of the 20-year-old couch was or the family mementos. And so it is, I have to take on a more active role in those cases to make sure that the decision that I'm making is the right decision for the parties, but I still hold pro se parties to the same rules of evidence. They don't get to let in a whole bunch of hearsay or get a whole bunch of hearsay in just because they don't know what the rules are. I just have to be a bigger arbitrator of that as the judge than I would otherwise if I had attorneys on both sides objecting.
Any suggestions about creating the record during the pandemic, whether it be practitioners or pro se litigants?
I think it is, I mean, really, it's no different than being in the courtroom. Occasionally, I have to remind people to not speak over one another. And that goes back to it being helpful if you're on video, because then you can see when somebody is actually going to finish the question that they're asking, or when they're going to respond, because there is a lot, if people are just on the telephone, there's a lot more interruptions, I think, than when you're appearing via video. But it's important to be respectful of the answers, even if it's not the answer that you want, and to allow them to finish, or to make sure you're just saying objection, so that then I, as the judge, can stop the testimony and resolve whatever the objection is. But I am always very cognizant of the record. And I do think attorneys sometimes forget when clients testify to something that they're, you know, when they're still saying over here, over there, or something to that effect, to then make sure on the record that it's clear, you know, the individual was talking about 6 feet from them. So I just try my best to correct the record or to add to the record if that information hasn't been put in.
In any particular type of case, such as a domestic case versus a civil case, do you use any pretrial hearings or discovery tools or scheduling orders?
So we don't. I know in the third, they have an automatic scheduling order that issues when a civil case gets filed, depending on the complexity of it. We don't do that here in the sixth, because we do have a huge section of civil cases that actually end up going into default, or that get settled. And so unless a case is just really lingering and the parties aren't moving it along themselves, so if that happens and it is lingering, I'll set a scheduling conference and get a scheduling order with any deadlines that I think or the parties think need to be put in there, including a deadline for mediation, because I do believe if parties can work out their own resolution, then they are happier in the end, and they're more likely to stick to what that resolution is. In domestic relations cases, I have an order that I try to ensure goes out with all notice of merits hearings that really sets out what evidence that I'll be looking for. And that is because the majority of my domestic relations cases are pro se or only have one attorney, that help give some guidance. Here's the information you need to bring, so we don't have to continue a hearing and reset it. But in general, we probably aren't as proactive as we could be in managing some of the more complex cases. But I usually find that if one attorney doesn't feel like things are moving quickly enough, they'll request the scheduling conference, we'll get it done and get an order put into place.
Appearing before you in the sixth, what would the practitioners need to know in appearing before your colleagues, such as Judge Heyeck and Judge Foy and Judge Stewart? Any insights you can give us on that?
I think that we all believe that attorneys need to be prepared. And if you're going to cite a case during some type of argument and you haven't already put that in a brief, especially because we're a little short on law clerks right now, it would be very helpful to provide that to the court beforehand so that we can read it, so that we can make sure that we are on the same page or ready to interpret the case, regardless of your interpretation. But just being prepared, having a good motions practice, and ensuring whatever you file with the court is professional, explains what the issues are, and And in the Sixth, so if a request for setting gets filed, it doesn't immediately get forwarded to the judge. That isn't how we function here. Here, requests for settings need to be submitted to each one of the judge's proposed texts, which you can find on our website. And so if you submit a request for setting to the clerk's office and wonder why it's not getting set, it's because we don't know about it. And so make sure you're submitting them to our proposed text individually, because that is the expedited or really only way to ensure that your hearings are getting set. But I think we're a lot alike. I think that the four of us are pretty laid back and want to make sure that we do a good job and that justice is served, but we want the correct information in front of us to make the decisions.
Judge, it's like I said, it's been an honor to appear before you. As my last question, what would you like the listeners to know about you, about your court, about Deming, anything that you've not raised already?
We are constantly evolving along with the legal field and the rest of the judiciary. And we are always trying to ensure that the programs we provide or the way in which we deal with attorneys or with litigants is the most efficient way to do so. So if you ever feel like something at the Sixth isn't functioning right or have an idea as to how something can function better, then talk to me and let me know, because we want to make sure that litigants are getting served the best way that they possibly can. And if something's going wrong and I don't know it, then I can't fix it. And I think all four of the judges here in the Sixth are very open to having discussions with attorneys in general at any point in time about the practice or about what we expect or what would make things go easier. Our goal is to get cases resolved in an efficient manner, which really provides justice to the litigants. And however we can do that best is what we want to be able to do.
Well, thank you for appearing here today and talking with us. I certainly miss being in front of you now that I'm part of the bench here at the Third, but it's certainly a pleasure to talk with you and missing all of your colleagues.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Member Services Department and Family Law Section. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Kevin McLeod at Incomptech. The viewers of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.